So I'd like to welcome our last but definitely not least presenter. You saw Ferose talking about the future engineer architect on day 2. Very pleased to have Ferose close this off as he closed off the session we did in San Ramon. And very much we've been building a movement, and even James beforehand, you folks are storytellers, the force multiply in your organization. And one big thing I learned in the San Ramon, I saw Ferose speak there twice. I learned a lesson very quickly after I saw him speak and the reaction of the crowd. Do not follow Ferose in a talk. Do not follow Ferose because the emotional reaction, the engagement. So I purposely scheduled my presentation the next day in front of Ferose. So it was great. So again, join me in welcoming Ferose, who heads up the SAP Academy for Engineering.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You guys who are standing back, if you feel comfortable, you can take a seat. Paul was very generous to give me 45 minutes, so I hope I can keep you engaged for the next 45 minutes. How many of you were there for my talk yesterday? Oh, okay, that's good. You guys want to hear me, that's great. But after my talk yesterday, I had a lot of people come and ask me various questions, and one of the questions they asked me was, Ferose, are you an AI optimist or an AI pessimist? You haven't given that answer yet. You kind of told a lot of things, but tell me, what is your perspective? What is your point of view? And my answer was, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I am an AI optimist. On Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and I'm an AI pessimist. On Sundays, I'm so damn confused that I give up. I don't want to think about AI on Sundays. You may be wondering, what am I going to talk about building movements in an enterprise architect forum? What the hell is this topic about? Let me explain this and set the context and then tell you why this is so important for all of us here. Yesterday, one of the speakers said something very interesting. The average age of a company is 18 years. Fantastic. You guys were listening carefully. And that average age is actually decreasing over a period of time. There's enough data to show that number is coming down. It was like 60 plus, and now it's 18 years. Almost every organization is speaking about scale, right? We want to scale our business. We want to reach out to millions of people. We want to make billions of money. Everybody speaks about scale, but they completely miss the point that the most important metric of scale is time. Can your company exist for 50 years? Can your company exist for 100 years is the most important question, not whether you can scale too quickly, too fast, because anything that scales too quickly, too fast will also die. So the fundamental question is, whatever business you are building, can it last long enough? Because it can have a long-term impact. Not about like, can I do this in 5 years and kind of exit, make some money and move on? The things that last a lot of time is great ideas. So my first question to all of you is, tell me an example of something that has scaled for a very long period of time, that's been relevant for a very long period of time, that's also impacted a lot of people. Give me an example. Sorry? Electricity, yes. Wheel. Polio? I'm not listening. Christianity. Religion. Christianity has lasted. It was there. It started in AD 30 to 33. Still relevant. 2 billion people still practice Christianity. How the hell did that last that long? How many of you have heard about the Amish community here in Lancaster? Fantastic. Isn't it amazing that a certain set of people in today's time do not use electricity and use horse carts right in the middle of Philadelphia. Like, how is it that possible? The Amish belief system started in 1693, and it's lasted 300 years. And me and my friend, Srivatsa, who was here, is a very good friend of mine, he said, I said, I want to go and see this. What is this place? How is it that people still live in that belief system, not too far away from Philadelphia in this conference hall where all we are talking about is AI, and there's a whole set of people who's traveling in buggies and saying, I don't want to use electricity, and that belief system has lasted 300 years. How is that possible? But companies can't last beyond 18 years now. Do you see a mismatch? What is happening? And that's what I want to unravel in the next 45 minutes. And I want to tell you how we can build systems that can last a long period of time and have a bigger impact. Is that interesting enough? Now, let me first start by telling you the difference between a transformation and a movement. Because every presentation that I've heard is talking about transformation. But people have no damn clue what's a movement. This is the first time, I'm 100% convinced, this is the first time you guys are hearing a presentation about building movements. You know what's the difference? The difference is a transformation is going from point A to point B, which is short term. Companies undergo transformation. SAP is undergoing a massive transformation. I know that because in the last 10 years they said, oh, we want you to become a cloud company. We are an on-prem company, we want to become a cloud company. That's the transformation. You go from point A to point B. Then the transformation is complete, and then you decide, okay, I need to move from point B to point C. Now you want to be an AI company and blah, blah, blah. That's transformation. You go from point A to point B in a finite period of time. A movement, on the other hand, is a shift in the belief system. That's complex. That takes time. The Amish community believes in a certain system. It took time to understand that belief system. It started with a handful of people. Today there are 400,000 people who have that belief system, and it's growing across the world. Surprisingly, it's going across the world. 400,000 people believe that I don't need to use electricity and I'm going to be happy using a buggy, not a car. That's a belief system. It's not a transformation. It doesn't have an end date. It's a belief system. Now, what I'm trying to tell, and I've been telling this to a lot of companies, is if you want to do large scale, if you want to exist for a long period of time, you have to talk about the belief system in the company, not just transactional transformations. People say, how does that make sense? Can you give me an example? Satya Nadella, when he took over as the CEO of Microsoft, this is the most common example everybody throws at you these days. 2014, he took it over. He didn't say, let's try to transform Microsoft from point A to point B. Of course, he wanted it to become a cloud company and embrace open source. Instead, on his first leadership meeting, he gave everybody a book called Nonviolent Communication. Nonviolent communication. He said, we have to change the culture of the company, which means we were always a know-it-all company. We want to now become a learn-it-all company. It's a belief system that you need to change across the company. It's not the transformation of going from on-prem to cloud or something else. He said, can we change the mindset of the people from a know-it-all mindset to learn-it-all mindset? That's a change in the belief system. Microsoft was known as a toxic, political, backstabbing company, and he said, no, we want to lead with empathy. And so he said, everybody has to read the book Nonviolent Communication. Steve Ballmer, if he had given that book, people would have smiled at him and laughed their heads off because he didn't stand for that idea. A very different leadership style. Satya stood for a very different leadership style. He said, I want to lead with empathy. That's the difference between a transformation and how can you build a movement that lasts for a very long time. A movement will last much longer after the leader has left because you have changed the mindsets of people. And that's much harder to do. Now, you may think, why the hell should I listen to you? The reason I want to tell you this is not to blow my trumpet, but I've done both transformations and movements that have all been widely documented. In fact, 2 of them have become Harvard case studies. I'll briefly talk about that, and I'll tell you some of the greatest movements and what every company and individual can learn about building movements. And you guys can build this in your own teams. You guys can build this in your own organizations. At the age of 33, I was asked to head SAP labs in India. Some of you who are sitting here probably know me from those days when I was the managing director here. Some of you are here, right? I see a lot of hands up. I was asked to transform labs. It was a 4,000 people organization. The CEO at that time, called Jim Schnaber, called me and said, Ferose, we're going through a lot of challenges. I want you to transform this organization in the next 2 years. Otherwise, we'll fire you. This is my 26th year in the company, so I'm still here. In less than 3 years, we were able to transform the company fundamentally. A Harvard case study has been written. If you do a Google search of how SAP Labs became an innovation dynamo, you can read the Harvard case study. I'm not going to talk about it because that's an example of a transformation. We have a problem, you need to fix it, you have a finite time, done. That's the transformation. What's a movement? In the same year, in 2010, my son was diagnosed with autism. And I was lost and confused. I had no clue what's hit me. I remember when the doctor gave the diagnosis of my son's condition. It took me 3 months before the final diagnosis happened. And the doctor said, your son is on the spectrum. My first question was, can you give me some medicines to fix it? He said, you're not getting the point. This is a condition for life. You can't fix him. He's autistic. I drove back home. Didn't speak to my wife at all. I couldn't. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. And I said, here goes my well-scripted life. I was a younger CEO of a global multinational. I had married my college sweetheart. And here I am, my only son is diagnosed with a lifelong condition. I went through depression. And then my mentor pulled me out from the depths of despair. My mentor called me because she said, Ferose, you haven't been responding to my emails. What happened? And I broke down. I said, my son Vivan is diagnosed with autism. I don't know what to do. She said something incredibly profound that changed my life forever. She said, Ferose, most people spend their whole life not knowing what their purpose is. You're incredibly fortunate the purpose found you. You can spend the rest of your life taking care of your son, or you can spend the rest of your life taking care of kids like him who are not as fortunate as you are. Make that your mission for life. You will lead a meaningful life forever. I must confess, it was like a switch going off in my head. From seeing myself as a victim, why me, to seeing myself as like, why not? Maybe this is the opportunity to do something meaningful for the larger good. But I had no clue what to do. One thing led to the other. I started the Autism at Work program way back in 2012. Anybody at SAP knows about that program. It is now a Harvard case study. More than 100 companies have an Autism at Work program across the world. I've spoken about it from the United Nations to the World Economic Forum. What started as a simple idea has now become a global movement. I started my own foundation called the India Inclusion Foundation. In India, for most people who know, disability is seen as a taboo. You don't speak about it. And I said, no, I want to change the narrative. It's okay if your child is disabled. It's fine. And the mission of the foundation is to accept people for who they are, is to celebrate people for who they are, is to give them a life of dignity. And I said, I am going to change that narrative for 1.4 billion people. Guess how many people work in my foundation? 0. It's entirely run by volunteers. It's one of the largest foundations working for people with disabilities. No employees, no payroll, no office space. And we are creating massive impact across the company. In fact, next week, Guardian is going to write a full-page piece on some of the initiatives we are doing. I'll send it to you. If you're following me on LinkedIn, you can read about it. Now, the question I'm asking is, how is it that people sign up to work for you with absolutely zero incentives? Why do people sign up with absolutely no incentives? No promotion, no bonus, no salary hike? That's the difference when you're trying to create a movement. Now, the question is, can you create a movement inside a company? That's what I'll try to unravel you by giving you a few examples of movements and then trying to tell you what is it that you can do to build a movement inside your organization. Paul is trying to do that in his own ways. He's saying, Ferose, can I build a community of enterprise architects and drive large-scale change which lasts for a very long period of time? He's a great community builder. He's been at it for tons of years. He doesn't even work for SAP. For many years, I thought he worked for SAP. Like, how the hell does he know so many people? He has direct access to the board members that even I don't have. I'm like, how the hell does this guy do it? He's a great example of a community builder without the incentive systems, without the transactional incentive systems we talk about. And that's what I want to explain to you in the next few minutes. Now, let me tell you the story, and this is so damn relevant in today's times. A story that's widely written, but very few people know about it. Some people may know in this room if you're from India, but this is one of the most incredible stories I've heard. A lot of people know about India's independence movement. A lot of people know Gandhi was the father of the country. After he was assassinated, there was one more gentleman. His name was Vinoba Bhave. He was the spiritual successor of Gandhi. When Gandhi died, he said, Vinoba is going to be the spiritual successor. He was assassinated, so he was building him up for him to become the spiritual successor. He knew that after the independence, the company will face a new set of problems, and you need a spiritual leader who could help the country go and make progress. India was an extremely poor country when we achieved our independence in 1947. The biggest problem was not just poverty, but the wealth was in the hands of a handful of people who owned land. It was an agricultural country, so the people who owned land were the richest, and everybody else worked for the people who were the landlords. So the wealth was massively concentrated in the hands of the few. And that was the biggest problem the country was facing. The top leaders realized that inequality will create social unrest. Can anybody think that's what we are going through now too? Nothing has changed. But the way we solve the problem is something that most people are not seeing at all. So Vinoba said, how am I going to redistribute land in a peaceful manner? The top 1% or less than 1% owned the land, and the 99% of the people who were in agriculture basically worked for them got very basic means. So Vinoba had this incredible idea. He said, I'm going to walk the whole country with a very simple request to the landlords. He said, I'll go to the landlord and say, adopt me as your child. So if you had 3 kids, make me your 4th kid. As soon as I become your 4th kid, I am now eligible for 1/4 of the land, because the land was only transferred in the family. So I get 25% now of the land. If you have 10 kids, make me your 11th kid. If you have 1 kid, make me your 2nd kid. So he said, as I keep walking from village to village, asking people to adopt me as a child, I start accumulating a little bit of the wealth, and I'll once after a period of time, I will give away, they'll redistribute that land to all the other farmers. People said, what a stupid idea. Vinoba started walking with 2 pairs of clothes and one brown shoes. He walked from village to village for 13 years, covered 58,000 kilometers on land, and peacefully transferred 4.4 million acres of land. It was the greatest transfer of land in the history of mankind. Time magazine put him on the cover of their annual magazine, and they had a single quote under it: I'm going to loot you with love. He used to go to a village. People would line up for kilometers to hand over their land. He said, take it. Because people loved him so much. They said, take it. And so his team would walk behind. They would do an actual adoption of this old man. Who doesn't want Vinoba Bhave as their kid? Who wouldn't want Gandhi as a kid? So people would line up. They will sign the adoption. They will transfer the land, and the people will collect. He will collect his land, and then he'll redistribute it to the poor. For 13 years he did this, and one of the most peaceful land transformations ever. Is there anything for us to learn from that story to today's story? How do we transfer land these days? Do you think it will ever last? No chance. No chance. Absolutely no chance. That's how you build a movement. Now, why am I saying this? Because when Vinoba started walking, there was a young 21-year-old kid who said, I am inspired by this man, I want to walk with him. He said, no problem, join. This 21-year, his name was Arun Dada. I hosted him for a talk at SAP 5 years ago, just before COVID. He passed away a year ago. He was so inspired by what he saw. Young 21-year-old kid. One day he knocked Vinoba's doors and said, I want to ask you a question. He said, yes. He said, Vinoba, instead of you, if I stand and ask the people to give me their land, do you think people will give? He said, people, you got it all wrong. People are not giving it to Vinoba, people are giving it to the idea of love. If you ask with the same purity of intention, if you ask with the same purity of love, if you ask for the same purpose, not for yourself, but for the larger good, people will give you. But you have to practice that, and you have to learn yourself internally before people will start following you. Let me tell you the second story. I'll tell you all these stories and then tell you what's common across all of them, and then I'll tell you how to apply it in your world. Make sense? Gandhi started walking in the year 1930. 1930, he used to live in an ashram. He had 78 followers there, 78. He started on something called a salt march. A salt march was very simple. And Gandhi was one of the great marketing guys in the world. There was no social media, nothing, but he had the ability to reach out and mobilize thousands of people. He should be the greatest case study of what great marketing is all about. The British had come up with a law which said that anybody who has to buy salt has to pay a tax. They wanted to make more money. And Gandhi said, salt should be every human being's right. I'm not going to pay you tax. Instead of what I'm going to do is I'm walking to the beach, taking the salt and producing it and purifying it and giving it to the people. I'm not going to pay any taxes on salt. So in 1930, he started a march from his place to the beach with 78 people. He walked for 24 days. He started with 78 people, but mobilized 350 million people on a simple idea. And people ask, like, why did 350 million people, that was the population of the country, rally around with this simple idea? You know why? Because everybody consumes salt. It was the genius of Gandhi. He said, how do I mobilize 350 million people on one simple thing that affects everybody? He said, it's salt. With no social media, 350 million came together to fight the British. It took 17 years before India got their independence, but that was the first big movement that got 350 million people together. The same thing happened here with the civil rights movement. 1940, it started with the Montgomery bus protests. And finally, the civil rights movement was passed in 1965, 25 years since Rosa Parks incident with the bus. So how did it galvanize the whole country? On an idea. It was not a transformation. It was an idea. It was a belief of equality. There's another classic example. Will people debate whether it was a movement, it was a failed movement, or it was a successful movement? There's a lot of debate. In 2017, one day after President Trump was inaugurated, millions of people walked across the country in the Women's March, if you remember. It was started by one post from a lady in Hawaii on Facebook that galvanized the whole country. Millions of people walked. 1 out of every 100 women in this country walked. It was across all the countries, all the continents, 60 countries people had walked. So how did so many people come together for a single issue? So what I'm going to tell you now is what is common across all of this. There are 6 things that are common across all the large-scale movements. So if you want to build a movement, do these 6 things and you can actually build a movement within your organization that will last for a long period of time. The first thing, and you can write it down, by the way, this is an article I've published in Forbes, so if you Google it, you'll find it, so you don't have to take notes. But there are 6 things that I want to share here. The first thing is across all these large-scale movements, you either have a common enemy or you work towards a collective pride. All the movements have to have a common enemy or a collective pride. When Gandhi started the Salt March, who was the enemy? The British. Once you have one enemy, it's pretty easy. When the women started marching, what was the problem? Trump. That's how people came together. When Vinoba was walking, he was not having an enemy. He said, I am working for the pride of the people, the poor people. So if you have a collective pride or a common enemy, you can galvanize people towards a common cause. Most fascinating things inside organizations is they confuse the hell out of this. When they want to change the culture and the mindset, they send a mail saying, starting tomorrow, here are the new values. Really? An email? They have no clue what they're talking about. You're talking of changing mindsets, my friends, not some language and literature here. Let's tweak these words and suddenly people got their new values. Complete bullshit. Happens all the time. Happens all the time. I see those mails and I'm like, are you smoking? Really? So the first thing is you need to have a common enemy or a collective pride. The second thing is the power of the grassroots people. People often believe I have to do it top down, but you also have to do bottom up. My friend Bob Huggy And Bob Sutton and Huggy Rao, who wrote this beautiful book called Scaling Excellence. He said, how can I scale excellence? He said, Ferose, the biggest problem in corporates is that they do a lot of air war but no ground war. Air war is what we all do. Like, this is the presentation, I do all hands meetings, everybody got it, sorry. Did you actually go to the people, make them understand that's the ground war you want? Here is a scientific piece of paper that I want all of you to read because it's so damn important. It is called The Strength of Weak Ties by Mark Granovetter. He's an economist at Stanford University. He wrote this paper, is one of the most referenced paper, and most people think he will win the Nobel Prize pretty soon. Please read this called The Strength of Weak Ties. Let me explain what is the strength of weak ties to make your life a little easy. There's something called the Dunbar number, which is 5, 15, 50, 150. Dunbar number. Do a Google search, you'll figure out all the details. The number is 5. That's the inner circle. 5 people. The next circle is 15 people. The third circle is 50 people. The fourth, the outer circle, is 150 people. The innermost circle is the strongest tie. He said the people who are closest to you, your spouse, your family, he said they are only 5. If you look, the people who are closest to you, the strongest tie is typically not more than 5 people. Strongest tie. The next circle becomes a little bit the friends of yours, whom you trust, whom you believe, who will show up when you have an emergency. He said that's not more than 15 people. The third circle is 50. These are people whom you know, but whom you kind of call once in a year. The 150 people are the total number of people whose names you can remember. So they did a scientific study and said, if I ask you, write down all the names of the people whom you know. He said, cognitively, our brains cannot remember more than 150 people. So that's the outer limit. Not more than 150. You can try this out. Now, the strength of weak ties is a fascinating insight that Mark Granovetter did. He said, if you are looking for a job, I don't know how many of you are looking for a job now, but if you are, this is the hint. If you are looking for a job, where do you think is the highest chance of finding one? Is it 5? Is it 15? Is it 50? Or is it 150? He said the highest chance of you finding a job is at the 150 people circle. Most people make the mistake of trying to find a job in the 5 or the 15 or the 50. The highest chance is in the outermost circle because the people who are inside the core they have the same network as you have. Why do you think LinkedIn works? You think they were just built something? They understood the strength of weak ties. The chances of you getting a job is much higher from unknown people who are connected to you on LinkedIn whom you have never met than from known people in your network. If you get a job, give me some percentage of your salary. You can clap louder, please. I've given away the biggest secret of finding the next job. I can tell you most people do it completely wrong because they have no clue what they're talking about. They reach out to the strongest tie. I'm saying reach out to your weakest tie. It's scientifically proven. This guy is going to get a Nobel Peace Prize sometime. Not Nobel Peace Prize, the Nobel Economics Prize. So what I'm trying to tell you is when you're building a movement, do not underestimate the power of the weak ties. This is what Paul does it so beautifully. He connects random people, random strangers, because he says this is a weak tie, but they're damn strong. There is a method in the madness in what he does. I'm like, how the hell do you know so many people? But that's the outer circle, and he's very good at connecting them. Strength of weak ties. The third insight is fascinating. It's called public lies and private truths. Let me explain this to you. When you go to have a dinner at your friend's place, somebody's invited you for dinner, and the food is lousy, and the guests and the host will ask you, how was the food? What would you say? It was pretty good. As soon as you get into your car, after you say goodbye, the first thing you turn around and tell you, well, that was damn lousy shit, man. What was that? What the hell was that? That's a classic example of what is a public lie. So you publicly lied to this person, but privately you are telling the truth, which is it was lousy. So Timur Kuran, who was a famous psychologist, wrote a book on public lies and private truths, and he said that when this happens in systems and communities, systems break. When this happens at scale, when thousands of people are publicly lying about something, systems fail. The thing that you have to notice is happens all the time in organizations. The classic example was in 2016 when Trump became the president. Every expert got it wrong. And people were like, how did every expert get it wrong? You know what happened? It was a classic example of what happened with public lies and private truths. The experts went and asked the people, whom did you vote? They all said, I voted for Hillary, but they actually voted for Trump. And when thousands and millions of people lie at one level, systems break. Happens all the time in corporates. In SAP, there is a term for it. They don't know that, this is proven psychologically by psychologists. It is called the watermelon effect. How many of you know the watermelon effect? The watermelon effect is pretty simple. If you cut the watermelon, the deepest part at the core of it is red, but while you come out, it is green. In all our presentations, when we build our presentations, we used to have this red, orange, and green color. It starts with red at the first level of team meeting. By the time it goes to the board, it becomes green. It's called the watermelon effect. The product hasn't changed, but the status has changed to green. What is happening? People are lying at scale. And when that happens, systems fail. Happens all the way. It's not just SAP, everywhere it happens. The reason I'm trying to tell you is to say that be aware that for you to build a large-scale change, you should be aware of these consequences. The fourth thing, it says all of these large-scale movements and changes are leaderful. When you look at India's independence movement, even though Gandhi was seen as the father of the movement, it had outstanding leaders. They say when you look back at the history of the country, we aggregated some of the finest leaders at one time. Even though there was a phase, there were hundreds of great leaders. If you look at the civil rights movement, it wasn't just MLK, there were many other leaders who were outstanding. If you look at the America's independence movement, they say the first Senate was one of the most profound thinkers in the world. I actually went to the Benjamin Franklin Museum yesterday just to, I'm a huge fan of Benjamin Franklin. I wanted to understand how he built the Constitution, how progressive was he. All of these movements do not rely on one person. If it relies on one person, it's game over. It's leaderful. And then I spoke to the author of the Pulitzer Prize book called March. March is a trilogy. There are 3 graphic novels of March. It is about the walk on the Selma. And I asked the author who worked with John Lewis to write this book, and I said, what was unique about that time? How did so many incredible people come together for one purpose? Did they not have differences in opinion? They said they all were very strong characters, had their point of views, they would argue and fight, but the next day morning they will all walk together because they were leaderful. That's full of leaders. So if you want to build something that lasts a very long time, you need to have more than one leader. It should be leader full. And the most interesting insight they said is these people have the ability to capture the energy in a bottle. They had energy that could float around. You walk in and you could feel the energy. It was like capturing the lightning in a bottle. If you see people with that kind of energy, you have a chance of building a movement. I remember Henning Kagerman, who was the CEO of SAP, one of the most admired CEOs, incredibly humble. In one of the press conferences, he was asked at his final press conference as a CEO, he was said, Henning, how do you evaluate your term as the CEO of SAP? He said, evaluate it 5 years after I have left, because if I built something that lasts, then I've been a good CEO. Don't evaluate me on the stock price today. That's the greatness of the man. He said, evaluate me 5 years after, because I have built a good culture. Culture will exist even when the CEO is not in the room. That's what leaderful organizations are. I'll now go to the fourth and fifth part. This is the most important. Movements are messy. If you want to do large-scale things, be prepared. It's going to be a rocky, bumpy ride. And let me explain how to deal with it. One of the finest speeches I've heard is from a Brazilian sailor, Amir Klink. One of the finest. I've heard Nobel laureates, I've been to World Economic Forum, I've heard presidents. The finest speech was from Amir Klink. He was the first man to circumvent the Antarctica in 79 days in 1998, alone, on a ship. Considered humanly impossible, because the reason was when you go alone on a ship or a boat, the winds are so hard that the boat will always tumble. And one person cannot lift the boat back. So it was considered humanly not possible to circumvent or go to Antarctica and come back with a single sailing boat with one human being. Amir Klink was a boat maker. So they were all trying to build a boat that will not fall when there's a big wind. All the great designers came, they tried for years, they couldn't do it. Because they said, as soon as the boat tumbles out, you can't pick it back. One person cannot pick it back. You need more than one. Then he had this great idea. He said, you know what? Why not build a boat which actually falls, but it comes back on its own? He said, shit, nobody thought about that. He built a boat which actually will tumble, but the design was in a way that it would actually come back. And then he became the first person to go to Antarctica alone on a sailing boat and come back in 79 days. He said, most people were trying to run away from the mess. He said, embrace the mess. If you want to do big stuff, don't expect it to be an easy ride. It will going to be messy. This is the final point. And then I'll tell you how you can build a movement. So the big question that all scientists and sociologists were trying to do is that at what point can a movement actually tip? At what point in today's time you can say, at what point does it become viral? Everybody wants to do a viral video, right? Nobody has a clue how to do one. Everybody is trying to figure it out, but the random things go viral. So at what point does something reach what I call as escape velocity? That it like gets to a point and zoom, What is the tipping point? How do you figure out what's the tipping point? So here is what the tipping point is. Scientists found that the tipping point is when at least 8% or up to 25% of the people start believing in that idea. They start influencing the remaining 75% and change happens. So he says, unless you get the imagination of at least 8% and up to 25% of the people, change will not happen across the company. You don't have to change the minds of all 100%. You have to change the minds of at least 85%, 8%, and up to 25%. If you got 25% of the people on your side, the remaining 75% will just follow you. They say, oh, if these guys are doing it, I'll do it as well. I think this is the right approach. So any transformation to happen inside a company or any movements to be built, convince 25% of the people and the change will happen. Why am I saying this? The reason I'm saying this is I gave the same presentation to Christian Klein when we asked me to do a transformation of the engineering culture of the company. He called me and said, Ferose, we have 40,000 engineers. Can you change the engineering culture of this company, of these engineering? Can we become an engineering-centric company again? Can we go back to have a sense of pride to be an engineer? Can you do that? And I said, there is a way to do it. I'll tell you how it happens in social movements. Let's try to do this within the company, and we'll be able to change the mindsets of the people. You're changing the mindset, not teaching them skills. That's damn easy. You can watch on a YouTube video and develop a skill. Changing mindset is incredibly hard. Sometimes in companies, most people learn by watching YouTube videos. But you can't learn swimming by watching YouTube videos. You have to jump into the water. So the big question is, how do you change mindset? So I said, Christian said, how many people has to go through the academy before change actually happens? I said, it takes me at least 10 years. But you don't have to change the mindset of 40,000 people. If you change the mindset of at least 2.5% or 8% to 25%, which means if you can change the mindset of around 10,000 people, between 2,000 to 10,000 people, you start seeing the ripple effect of the change. Because these people now go and change the mindset of the other people. So you don't have to upskill everybody. You don't have to change the mindset of everyone. You have to change the mindset of 8 to 25%. If you can do that, change will happen, but it takes time. Can you do this in 1 year? Not possible. Sorry. This is too hard. It takes time. So let me summarize by saying, how can you build a movement? It takes 4 things to do it. These are the principles you have to remember. But if you ask someone like a Paul, like what's the thinking, there are 4 things. First, you should have incredible discipline to do the same thing over and over again. It can be pretty boring, but you have to do it. There's discipline. You can't say, I'm going to do an enterprise architect event once and done. You have to do it quarter after quarter after quarter after quarter. He does something very smartly. Nobody, I think, understands the reason behind it. Everywhere he puts this flag. Every transformation requires a symbol, good or bad. By the way, movements can be built to do bad stuff too. It's the same principles. And that happens all the time. Bad movements also happen, good movements also happen. It's the same principle. You need to have a symbol. Because a symbol is something that glues the people together. When he takes a photograph with the enterprise, so you are now a community. These are the community of EAs. You may think, why the hell is he taking this photograph all the time? I'm like, there's a method in the madness, guys. So the first thing is to have the discipline. The second is to have a sense of pride. What he is doing is, oh, now I'm an enterprise architect. I have a sense of pride belonging to this community. And the last but most important thing is to do something together. There is no outcome without doing. So the first is discipline, second is pride, third is build a community, fourth is action. He will give you actions. He'll say, do this. Follow through. There's a summary. You connect. There is actions. These are not just entertainment sessions that you come here and go back. You have to do something about it. If you do these 4 things, you can build a community and you can build a large-scale change. There was this fascinating thing that happened in Palo Alto. I think it was 1965. There was a history teacher who was talking about the Holocaust. And so one of the students stood up and said, but how can somebody do this when the rest of the country was quiet? Why did nobody push back? And he said, it's a movement. Anybody can build a movement. And so he said, I'll prove it how to do it. And he said, you follow these 4 principles and you can start a movement right here. And in the 5th day, they had to close down the experiment because everybody started going up in arms. These are students. They did the same things. They said they had a symbol, they built a community, they had discipline, they came together, they put something that had a sense of pride, and suddenly the students in high school built a movement. It's the same principles. You can do it too. The reason I say this is I think we have a moral obligation to build a movement for the larger good. Because in difficult times, we tend to feel powerless. What can I do? What can one person do? Can this change anything? Does my voice matter? Do I have the power? And I am telling you, when my son was diagnosed with autism, I thought the world had come to an end. And today, he's the reason that thousands of people across the world has not just got jobs, but have got dignity. And it all started with one child. So do not underestimate the power that each one of you have. But the most important thing is to use the power to do the right things. Because you can also be incredibly powerful and use it for the wrong things. And the reason I'm saying this is each one of you here is incredibly powerful in your own ways. And so do not underestimate how you can use your power to do good to SAP, to the larger community. Thank you very much.
Wasn't that, now you know why I did not want to follow him in the talk. And, truly inspiring in so much of what he does. I encourage you to follow him. And it's all about, it's kind of funny. You learn things from your own event, right? And that's the cool thing. I mean, the comment, he talked about being leaderful, right? I made a comment, unknowing the 2 things were quite connected the other day about not volunteers, but emergent leaders, which is sort of key in the whole thing as well. And, Ferose talks about the flag, right? The flag photos everywhere. You've seen it, right? And I'll tell you a funny little story about the flag. And it's become a thing, right, in terms of people getting behind something. So I go regularly to Waldorf. I always stay at the Heidelberg Marriott. I go there a lot. I love that hotel. It's not the most renovated, but it's perfect. And it's sort of funny. It's like being my own big living room. I got a restaurant, I got a bar, I got a lounge. This last trip, I was there a few weeks ago. You know how on the Marriott messaging app, you sort of text beforehand and say, I'm coming in, this time's blah, blah, blah. So I text that, looking forward to my stay, so on and so forth. And here's the response I got from the staff. Don't forget the flag. Don't forget the flag. So Ferose talked about, in a way, we're building a movement. Honestly, I'll tell you folks honestly, the technology is fine. What I care about most is the human side of things and the connections and how we force multiply. So thank you very much for joining us. And we're going to continue the movements, the interactions, the engagements in different forms and fashions. And again, Ferose, thank you so much for spending the time. Wasn't this the best way to bookend this session, close this session? So, and just by the way, this is just a taste in a way of what we did at the Academy last year. I think I told you guys, folks, not just guys and ladies, is that fourth day, we had guys, architects hugging. And the lady said to me, Claudia said who you met this morning, said, Paul, the guys were hugging. We had to hug too. So let's grab a photo of the flag, and Helmut's going to say a couple of words. And Ferose, I just got to say, awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, my good friend.
Thank you.
Helmut, do you just want to say a couple of words in closing?
Just one, not just 30 seconds. So basically, there's one wish I have to all of you. When you go home, reflect who you met, what you have learned, and share your experience when you are the next time back. And I don't mean about experiences, about what you learned about enterprise architecture. Share that you have probably met a friend. You saw a purpose in life. Something's changed. That's what we want to hear. And I also want to reflect to Ferose. I mean, you know, Ferose, we don't know each other that long, but to be honest, you already changed my life. And I will tell you about this, what has changed. Thank you very much. I hope to see you soon. Have a great trip home. Thank you, Doug.
So just one closing thing before we grab lunch. There's a phrase by Oliver Wendell Holmes that says, a mind changed by a new experience cannot go back to its old dimensions. And I think that's one thing I think you may find after you leave today. You know, you go back, take some time and even process some of the, I think that was a Canadian thing, process. But again, thank you so much, and just thank you. Safe travels.